We are back, and you're listening to the Critical Hour on Radio Sputnik. I'm Wilmer Leon, joined here by my co-host, Garland Nixon.
Thank you, Wilmer.
Iran's Supreme Leader Khamenei blames U.S. for stalled nuclear deal talks. Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei yesterday said the U.S. was stubborn in its demands for Iran during its indirect talks to revive the nuclear deal and blamed Washington for delaying negotiations. What do we make of this? And also, has this been the U.S. tactic all along? For insight, we turn to our next guest. He's the editor and co-owner at geopoliticsalert.com, James Carey. James, welcome back.
Always good to be here.
So Khamenei said that Washington has also refused to provide a guarantee that it wouldn't withdraw from the JCPOA again. Quote, they once violated the nuclear deal at no cost by exiting it. Now they explicitly say they cannot give guarantees that it would not happen again. This is according to Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. So, James, your thoughts on this, and also, to me, the fact that the indirect talks never moved to direct talks is an incredible signal to me as well. Your thoughts, James Carey?
Yeah, I think the talks never became direct talks because I think the U.S. basically knew that this change in government was coming up and Rouhani was going to be leaving for a more hardline president. But at the same time, this idea of opting out of the deal that's been added in, this clause where you can opt out at any time, the U.S. can, along with the new demands on Iran that weren't there pre-Trump that have been put on by the Biden administration show that there's never really been a good faith effort to negotiate this. And even if the U.S. decides to rejoin the JCPOA by some off chance, which, again, it doesn't look like they're trying to, but even if they do, the opt-out clause leaves them this space where if Iran's doing something we don't approve of in the future, as they are now, we can always just cite this clause and opt out of the treaty and punish them for whatever new crime they've supposedly committed. As you're seeing now with the idea of restrictions on their ballistic missile program or funding to proxies and things like that, being demands for the U.S. to re-enter the JCPOA.
James, I'm going to give you three different circumstances. Here's from antiwar.com. Iran Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei on Wednesday said the U.S. was stubborn in its demands of Iran, right? Let me give you another one. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov described U.S. policy on Russia as deadlocked and even dumb. Let's go to the next one. Vice Foreign Minister Xi Jinping urged the U.S. to change its highly misguided mindset and dangerous policy. James, I think I'm starting to see a pattern here. I think everybody in the world's looking at the U.S. foreign policy and saying, you guys are a flock of morons. What's going on here? Perhaps it isn't just Iran. James.
Yeah, I think that's basically been the Biden foreign policy since he took the office, is they're trying to roll back this time to basically, it seems like the war on terror where the U.S. is the only power, or, an Obama-era foreign policy where the U.S. makes all demands and people should be, other nations should be grateful that we're even discussing anything or that we're giving them options to choose from. Iran should be grateful we're offering them a way into the JCPOA, even if it's totally backwards from the way they originally entered. China, we're trying to put back in this submissive role. And, what the latest gripe with Russia is, I'll never know. I can't keep up anymore. But they're always doing some crime that the U.S. has to punish. And that doesn't seem to be stopping anytime in the foreseeable future. And China is definitely the big one, too, where there's this other economic power that really got a boost by Trump's mismanagement. And I think that frightens the United States, as Iran does an alternate military power in the Middle East. These concepts of alternate power structures across the globe seem to be frightening the U.S. And the Biden administration's plan seems to be, let's just go back, which is not possible, especially after 4 years of Trump.
You mentioned in an answer to an earlier question that the United States was anticipating the Iranian elections, and I wanted you to elaborate on why you felt that the United States thought that Iranian elections was a leverage point. I assume that's what you meant. that the Iranian elections would be a leverage point for the United States, Iran wanting to get the New Deal done before the elections took place. And I see now, I interpret all of this that the United States overplayed that thought and that it wasn't nearly the leverage point that the United States thought it would be. And now you've got the U.S. warning Iran's incoming government that there won't be a better nuclear deal, that somehow Ibrahim Raisi, who replaces Rouhani, is now going to, I don't know, be more willing to acquiesce than before. I think Joe Biden's been drinking. Your thoughts, James Carey?
Yeah, I think there was definitely a thought that we'll try and rush this through before the election and keep, and obviously Obama wanted this too, to keep the moderates in power in Iran as far as elections go. But at the same time, the hardline government gives the Biden administration this excuse to not do the deal if that's what they're aiming to do. It gives them an excuse to say Iran isn't complying more. And I think their hopes were that they could either get the deal done the way they wanted, where basically the Iranian government is forced to fold to their demands before the election, which, did not happen, didn't work because much like any country we say we're liberating now, I don't think the Iranian people trust the U.S. that much. They have no reason to, obviously. And so I don't think the idea of, well, we'll rush this through with the moderates before the election could have worked anyway, especially with the new demands we've levied on Iran. So I think the idea of letting, it was obvious a hardline candidate was going to win. Once we started making the demands on Iran, we did after Biden was elected. I think that at this point, it's just fine for them because this is like an Ahmadinejad situation where, the Iranian president can be used as a foil now, where I think, maybe they'll divert negotiations to another channel in Iran closer to the Ayatollah or something like that. But I think the presidency will just be used as a cudgel against Iran now, even though it's basically our policy that caused the hardliners to take power again.
Well, and the thing about it, I think relative to the U.S. foreign policy team, I don't see how we could refer to anyone on earth as hardliners. I mean, there's no one, the people that have been in under the Obama administration, under the Trump administration, under the Biden administration, which might I add are mostly the same people, are absolutely hardline. And I got to add this, and can't get a deal with anyone. They couldn't get a deal with North Korea under Trump. Right now, they're getting no deals with Russia, no deals with China, no deal with major powers. Our government, for all their bluster, at some point you have to look at the outcome. If you are really that good at diplomacy, you're going to strike a deal with someone. We barely eked out a deal with our ally Germany on Nord Stream 2, and that was only because Germany bucked up and said, no, not happening. So basically, even with Nord Stream 2, with our own ally, the U.S. lost in trying to bully them. James.
Well, but James, before you respond, if I may say to Garland, gunboat diplomacy only works so long as your gunboat can float. And what we are now finding out is there's a big A hole in the boat. James Carey, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that you have to also guarantee you have the biggest boat. But we've definitely, there's a crisis of confidence, I think, that we've definitely lost the ability to do things. Iran, a large part of Iran's new leverage has come from the Syrian civil war, which you can argue the Obama administration started, or at least egged on. So you have this country with, now we have all these restrictions. Oh, you have to limit your ballistic missile program. You have to limit support for like Hezbollah and groups like that. And we have these conditions on Iran where it's like, well, again, it's trying to turn back the clock, and you don't have the leverage to turn back this clock anymore. Russia and Iran have secured their place in Syria, and Iran has secured its place as a Middle East power. China has secured its place as a world power, and Russia has secured their place as basically, at least some type of diplomatic powerhouse in the eastern part of the world. As far as like Armenia, Syria, and everything like that goes, Russia is always the one to step in now. So the U.S. has definitely lost its credibility as the one power broker. And like you pointed out, even with our own allies, that no longer holds up. Even Macron in France has been a big advocate of, well, let's try to separate from the United States because they're inconsistent and they could change any day. And if our own allies recognize that threat, there's no doubt that our adversary nations like China have noticed this too. And they're more coherent than us. They have much more of a planned strategy, and they're definitely going to take advantage of these big holes we've left in our empire.
And the other thing is, too, when it comes to the JCPOA, our allies I'll put it like this. The countries in Western Europe, in some parts of Eastern Europe, see themselves as U.S. allies. The U.S. empire sees them as vassals, and there is now a contradiction between those definitions. Their the self-definition of Germany, and rightfully so, it's an economic powerhouse, and it has a right to make decisions based on its own strategic interests. So these other countries are saying, hey, we don't want to battle with China. They're also saying, hey, man, get this JCPOA thing done. If you remember, France, I believe one of the French companies had like $1 billion contract in Iran to develop oil fields, and when the U.S. backed out of it, they lost a lot of money. So these countries are saying they're trying to act on their strategic and economic interests, and Iran is a powerful country and they can make deals with it. And so the U.S. is at odds not just with Iran, but with their allies as they see themselves and vassals as we see them in Western Europe, particularly when it comes to Iran, the Iranian deal. And we're going to lose a lot of friends if we don't get, which we are unable to get any deal, but if we're not able to make this happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're going to lose those friends anyway, because Trump showed that, we can't be trusted to be consistent on anything. We could have a president again in 4 years who's yelling at them to pay up on their NATO dues. They don't know. There's no way they can trust any stability from the U.S., let alone like international diplomacy. And look at COVID, really pointed out the U.S. will take its interests first in an international crisis, no matter what. And Europe, they can figure it out on their own after us, or we'll help them figure it out when we're done. But either way, the U.S. comes first, whether it's a Democratic or a Republican president, when it's a global crisis.
And it also seems to be that the United States fallback position is its entry position, a military solution. And the world is saying your military can't even roll like it used to now. You're no longer the big dog on the block. We've got about a minute and a half, James Carey.
No, that's definitely part of it, too. Is if there wasn't this shake in confidence from Trump, it was already coming anyway, because this 20-year war on terror was such a mess that, most NATO countries hadn't wanted to enter Iraq anyway. And you had this 20-year war in Afghanistan that NATO countries are still committed to. As far as a ground war goes, I don't think there's anyone, including U.S. citizens, who would have any confidence in the U.S. to pull off anything like that now. We saw Obama's sort of proxy war strategy blow up in Syria and other places after the Arab Spring.
Libya.
And I don't think there's anyone who wants to get involved. Look at how bad Europe's gotten hit for Libya, even though that was an Obama planned project.
James Carey, as always, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate your analysis, and we look forward to having you back.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. You're listening to the Critical Hour on Radio Sputnik. I'm Wilmer Leon. I'm joined here by my co-host, Garland Nixon. And guess what, folks?